A young black woman is yelled at in the middle of a modest diner. She spills a glass of water and is fired on the spot by the manager, right in the middle of the lunch rush. "We don't keep servers like you around here." But what no one knew, the woman they had just thrown out wasn't someone lucky to get hired. She was the one who owned 40% of the restaurant chain. The only daughter of one of the most powerful finance moguls in America, and someone who had chosen to live anonymously behind an apron, in worn-out shoes, just to answer one question. Can real love exist in a world built on judgment? What would make a wealthy heiress turn down diamond rings, gala dresses, and a billionaire's proposal to wipe down tables, carry coffee, and endure the sting of condescending stares? And what would make her stay silent when she's insulted, mocked by customers, told by coworkers to her face, "You look better mopping floors than standing behind a register"? Who is she? Why was it that just one look from her could silence an entire room? Why, when a man in a tailored suit walked in and called her Zaria Monroe in front of everyone, did Cassie the manager and the boy she had quietly loved both freeze in place? This isn't a Cinderella love story. This is the story of a black woman who chose to step down, live honestly, love deeply, and yes, get hurt for real. But it's also the story of how she stood back up, kept her dignity, and made an entire system shift with nothing but the truth. Zaria Monroe was born beneath the flash of cameras and the polished kind of congratulations. She'll carry the legacy. From a young age, she knew how to sit properly, speak correctly, dress appropriately, and stay silent at the right moments. As the only daughter of Harold Monroe, founder of the Monroe Holdings financial empire, Zaria was taught that softness was a weapon, and quiet is the poise of a well-bred woman. She attended European boarding schools, graduated from the Ivy League. After college, she joined her father's firm in the CSR division, not due to lack of ability, but because, as they said, girls belong in the human-facing departments, not the balance sheets. She didn't react. She nodded, because reacting didn't belong in a debutante's vocabulary. Everything was going as planned, until her father presented a proposal: marriage, a strategic union, with the son of a major business partner, a prominent old-money white family. Together, they would form the perfect alliance: finance, media, and public image. Zaria stared at the sample wedding invitation the assistant handed her. Ivory cardstock, gold trim, her name embossed in fine print. But at the center of that invitation, there was nothing that truly belonged to her. She sat there, silent, as always. But this time, she didn't nod. She didn't argue with her father. She didn't scream. She didn't destroy anything. She simply vanished. No text, no goodbye. She changed her name, canceled her credit cards, rerouted her assets into trust accounts. And a few days later, Zaria Monroe, once listed among the top 100 most powerful young women in America, walked into a modest diner in a middle-income neighborhood and applied for a job as a waitress. No one recognized her. No one Googled her real name. Because in this place, no one cared who you were as long as you carried the tray right, wiped the tables right, and didn't spill water on the guests. And for Zaria, that was enough. She didn't want to be loved for being a Monroe. Didn't want to be admired for her net worth. She wanted to know one thing: if stripped of wealth, title, and even identity, would anyone still see her as human? And to find that answer, she gave up everything. Not to live like someone else, but to finally live like herself. The diner where Zaria applied for work wasn't large. Perched at the intersection between a middle-class neighborhood and the old administrative district, it was the kind of place people stopped at out of convenience, not affection. The hand-painted sign had weathered since the 90s, its letters peeling off, the once ivory background now stained a yellowed hue, like a memory left too long in the sun. Every morning the smell of burnt toast, sizzling butter, and overbrewed coffee hung in the air, a vapor that never quite made it through the vents. Inside, heavy wooden tables with chipped edges lined the space, plastic tablecloths worn to a dull sheen. The walls were dotted with faded black and white photos. The local high school football team from 1983, the former owner shaking hands with the mayor, all yellowing with time. A small television hung from the corner, always blaring either the morning news or cheap reality shows, the volume just slightly louder than necessary. Regulars no longer noticed. They didn't come to listen. They came to pour caffeine into their mornings, grumble about rising prices, then head to work. The clientele was mostly middle-tier office workers, night shift security guards, plumbers from the nearby repair depot, housewives, a couple retirees. They weren't bad people, but they weren't particularly kind either. They were rushed, they were tired, and they carried with them very fixed ideas about what a proper server should look like. Zarya did not fit those ideas. From the first day she stepped behind the counter, Cassie, the seasoned floor manager, stared at her for just a second too long. Zarya wasn't out of uniform, wasn't clumsy or slow, but she was too quiet, too composed, and she was a black woman. In a place where the ideal waitress was imagined to be a blonde, white girl who said "yes, ma'am," and smiled at the right times, Zarya became an unwelcome question. And people who dislike questions tend to find ways to erase them. Cassie was never outright rude. She didn't have to be. All she needed were comments like, "You don't really seem like the diner type, huh?" Or, "Not everyone's cut out for this kind of work. Some folks are born to be served, not to serve." Zarya heard it all, but she never reacted. Because this place, this noisy, grease-slicked, flickering light diner, was exactly the kind of place she chose to test the world. Julian had been working at the diner long before Cassie ever earned her morning shift lead badge. He didn't talk much, but everyone in the place knew he was always the first to arrive each morning, checking the stovetops, adjusting the thermostat, wiping every inch of stainless steel before the head cook came in. He didn't brag, he didn't mingle. But there was one thing everyone silently acknowledged. Julian didn't work to get promoted. He worked because he respected the work itself. Zarya noticed him from day one, not because he helped her carry a heavy sack of flour or showed her a quicker way to wipe down tables, but because he was the only one who didn't look at her with judgment in his eyes. At first, Julian just nodded hello each morning. When Zarya spilled the first batch of coffee because of a loose faucet, he didn't scold her. He just handed her a rag and said, "I spilled my first one too. You only gotta be a little better than yesterday." It wasn't a profound statement. It wasn't dramatic. But it stayed with her the rest of the day. Cassie noticed it too. One afternoon, seeing Julian quietly helping Zarya clean behind the bar, she smirked and muttered, "Careful, Julian. Girls like her don't stick around long." Julian didn't respond. He just looked at Cassie the way someone might when they realize how small a thought can make a person. The next day, Zarya found a small folded piece of paper tucked between the napkins at the prep station. The handwriting was tilted, a little uneven, but clear. "I think you're doing better. And I see you're not what they say." No signature, but she knew who it was from. Zarya wasn't the type to be swayed by polite niceties. She'd grown up surrounded by false compliments, business cards with smiles on the front and knives tucked in the back. But with Julian, she didn't feel like someone was trying to figure her out. She felt seen. For the first time in weeks, Zarya began to smile for real. Not the kind you flash to appease customers. Not the one you wear to hide fatigue. But the quiet kind, the one that begins deep inside. The kind only a kind glance can awaken. Julian didn't talk much. And that, precisely, was why every time he did speak, his words cut deeper than all the polished compliments Zarya had been fed her whole life. Once, when she accidentally dropped a tray of spoons on the floor, a customer at table 3 snorted and said, "Maybe you need to go back to grade school." Julian walked by. He didn't say anything to the customer. He just crouched down, picked up the spoons, placed them gently back on the tray, then looked at Zarya and said, calmly, "Just a slick floor. Not your fault." Just one sentence, but it was enough to pull Zarya out of the invisible shell she wore every day like armor. They started talking after Shift's brief conversations by the back exit, near the apron hooks, while rinsing their hands. Julian shared that he had once studied architecture in college, but dropped out when his mother had a stroke. She was his whole world, and when she needed him, he stayed. Nothing noble about it, he chuckled. Just what needed to be done. Zarya listened, never interrupting. But inside, she felt quietly seen. Because sometimes, the ones who give up the most are also the ones who speak the least. One evening, it rained. Julian came into the night shift with a damp jacket but a perfectly dry paper bag in hand. He placed it on the prep counter and slid it toward Zarya. Coconut cookies. My mom made them. You should try one. Zarya hesitated. Aren't you afraid I won't like them? Julian smiled. I don't need you to like them. I just want you to know you deserve kindness. The words were as soft as a breeze but hit like a confession. Something cracked open inside her, a small, delicate fissure beneath the steel layers she'd worn since the day she entered that diner. She started looking forward to the end of each shift, not for the break, but for the chance to exchange a few quiet words with the only person in that place who didn't care where she came from. But that very feeling terrified her. Because if Julian could be this kind without knowing who she really was, what would happen when he did? She never lied, but she didn't tell the whole truth either. When Julian asked, "Where'd you go to school?" she just smiled. A small place, nothing fancy. When he asked, "What does your family do?" she looked him in the eye and said, "Finance, small-time stuff." She hated being vague, but the closer she got to him, the heavier the truth felt. Zarya was starting to realize, real love wasn't scary. What was terrifying was the idea that it might only survive if she kept hiding who she truly was. Midday that day, the diner was busier than usual. The kitchen was sweltering, customers were ordering in a rush, and Cassie, acting floor manager today, wasn't about to miss her chance. Zarya was working table 3, left hand balancing a tray of water glasses, right hand holding a coffee pot. A woman with Gucci sunglasses and a diamond ring snapped her fingers. "You? Over here." Zarya walked over. The woman tilted her chin upward, her gaze sweeping over Zarya like a barcode scanner. "I ordered black coffee. No sugar." "What is this?" She flicked her head toward the cappuccino on the table. Zarya bent slightly. "I'm sorry. I'll replace it right away." "No need. I'm not drinking this. But I also don't want to see you again. Tell your manager to send someone else." Zarya nodded, voice calm. "I understand. I apologize." Cassie was already nearby, arms crossed. "I told you, she's not fast enough, not sharp, not professional." Zarya set the tray down. She hadn't even turned when Cassie stepped forward, slapped a paper down on the counter. "I already drafted this. Resignation letter. You just need to sign it." A few customers at the next table looked over. Some smirked. Some shook their heads, as if watching a show. No one intervened. "We don't need someone spilling coffee on guests," Cassie kept going. "Don't need someone who causes complaints. And especially, don't need someone here to practice being a waitress." Zarya raised her head. Her eyes were red, but no tears. Her hand hovered above the paper. Then the manager stepped out, holding the ledger, face creased in irritation. "What's going on in the middle of lunch hour?" Cassie pointed. "She's about to resign. My recommendation." The manager looked Zarya up and down. "You should have known this line of work doesn't suit you. Some people are born to sit at the table, not serve it." Zarya's fingers clenched slightly. Her lips pressed together. Every sentence sliced not cleanly, but like a dull blade, not sharp enough to sever, but deep enough to leave her bleeding inside. Then, the diner door swung open. No one turned around. Everyone was just another customer. But then came the sound of leather shoes striking the old tile floor, and a voice not loud but sharp enough to tilt the entire atmosphere on its axis. "Who just said my daughter isn't qualified to work here?" Everything froze. Zarya turned her head slowly. She already knew. She wasn't surprised. A man in a black suit, crisp white shirt, tall stature, eyes sharp as blades, walked in with unwavering steps. Harold Monroe, CEO of Monroe Holdings. His face had graced the cover of Forbes, shaken hands with presidents, commanded attention in the world's most prestigious investment halls. And now, he stood inside this diner, in front of everyone. Zarya, what are you doing here? Cassie stepped back entirely. The manager's jaw dropped. One of the servers set down a tray mid-motion. Julian stepped out from the kitchen, his gaze locking instantly with Zarya's. You are, the manager stammered. Harold didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on his daughter. I'm her father, and the owner of the restaurant chain you're currently managing with nothing but contempt and arrogance. Silence. Zarya untied her apron. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed steady. I came here to find out if a black woman with no name, no title, could still be treated like a human being. And today, I got my answer. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't cry. She simply walked forward past Cassie, now frozen like a statue, past the manager, who had slowly backed away toward the counter, past Julian, who still didn't know what to say. Every step she took was a strike against the way this system judged people by their uniform, their mistakes, their skin. And when the door closed behind her, for the first time in their lives, they watched a waitress walk out like a queen. Zarya stepped out of the diner. It wasn't raining, but no one would be able to recall later if the sun had been shining that day. She didn't turn back. Not to see Cassie's pale face, not to watch the manager unpin his name tag, not even to search for Julian's eyes. Because if she looked back, she'd have to confront something that hurt more than anything else. The silence between two people who had once seen each other so clearly. Her apartment held only a small suitcase and a few dry goods. Zarya sat on the edge of the bed, opened her bag, and took out an old notebook, the one where she had scribbled every small detail about Julian. Not romantic musings, but things she was afraid she might forget unless she wrote them down. Julian likes coconut cookies. He doesn't eat raw onions. When he's tired, he rubs the right side of his cheek. He never called Zarya the waitresses only by her name. She closed the notebook. She had deceived him not with lies, but with withheld truth. She never said who she really was. Never told him about her father, her old life, the parties where people ate caviar with silver spoons and hid their indifference behind well-rehearsed smiles. Julian had seen her, as a regular person. And because of that, she had never felt more like herself. But now, everything had changed. She pictured his face when her father walked in. That face hadn't shown anger or disgust, just shock, disorientation. And for Zarya, that was already too much to bear. Because it told her one thing, louder than words. I've lost something that money could never buy back. Her father sat across from her, in the vast marble-floored living room. He didn't speak a word of reproach, didn't ask why. Have you experienced enough? He asked. Zarya looked out the window, where the afternoon light was casting long shadows across the trees already turning with the season. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. Enough to know what's real and what only looks like it. Her father didn't respond. He simply stood up, poured himself a glass of wine, and stepped out of the room. Zarya remained where she was, seated alone in a house filled with dozens of empty chairs no one ever sat in, hundreds of decorative objects no one ever touched. She didn't know if Julian would ever trust her again. Didn't know if he'd ever find the strength to climb the wall named Monroe. But there was one thing she knew with piercing clarity. If he didn't come, she wouldn't blame him. Because if she were him, she wasn't sure she could believe again either. Julian looked at her. Eyes slightly red, not from rain, not from sun, but from standing in front of someone he thought he might never see again, without losing something inside himself. He didn't smile, didn't run, didn't say, I miss you, or why didn't you tell me? He simply said, quiet and steady, "I'm not here to ask why." Zarya blinked. She felt her breath catch not because she didn't have answers, but because this was the one line she didn't expect. Julian's voice didn't waver. "I'm not here for the mansion, or your last name, or your story. I'm just here because when I looked at you, I saw a person." He paused. "And I still do." Zarya stepped closer. Her hand rose as if to reach for something, maybe his sleeve, maybe his voice, maybe just to confirm he was real. She whispered, "You're not angry?" Julian looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "Number just disappointed. Didn't think I'd choose you even if I knew." Her eyes brimmed. But she didn't cry. She stepped forward, closed the distance between them. And for the first time since she left that diner, since she walked away from her own silence, she spoke without hesitation. "Then I'm sorry." Julian nodded once, just once. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, like he'd been doing it forever. Not because she was Zarya Monroe, but because she was Zarya. And this time, she didn't run from being seen. Zarya stood in front of Julian, her hand resting lightly on the door not fully closed. The wind swept through the porch, catching the hem of her white shirt, lifting a thin veil of silence like a curtain. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said, her voice still unsteady. Julian didn't respond immediately. He lifted the cloth bag slightly. "You forgot this." Zarya gave a small laugh. Not out of joy, but because that simple excuse made her feel a lump in her throat. "Thank you. But you didn't have to." "I know." They stood there, looking at each other not like lovers, but like two people who once walked side by side so closely, only to be pulled apart by a truth that had never been spoken. Julian looked at her, unblinking. "I'm not angry that you hid from me. I'm angry because I don't know who I fell in love with. A waitress? A billionaire's daughter? Or someone who never gave me the chance to be honest with my heart?" Zarya nodded slightly, not arguing. "I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you would change. And I couldn't bear it if the way you looked at me was no longer the same. And now?" Zarya lifted her gaze, no longer avoiding. "Now, I'm not afraid of you changing. I'm afraid I've made it impossible for you to come back." Julian was silent for a long moment. He spoke, his voice low but firm. "I don't know who you are outside of what I've seen. You're careful when you wipe tables. You frown when customers are disrespectful. You carry coffee trays with both hands because you're afraid of spilling again." He paused, eyes still fixed on her. "That's the person I fell in love with." Zarya swallowed hard. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "I love you too." She simply stood there, as if someone had just lifted the weight off her chest with one single sentence. Julian took a step closer. "I don't know who you'll be tomorrow, but yesterday, today, and right now, I still want to wash dishes with you, wipe tables, and talk about nonsense in a greasy kitchen." Zarya smiled. No tears. But her gaze was softer than anything she had ever allowed anyone to see. She stepped aside, opened the door wide. "Come in. I still have coconut cookies." Julian nodded. He didn't grin, just a small smile. And just like that, the two of them didn't start over. They continued for the first time, with nothing left to hide. A week later, the restaurant chain where Zarya once worked received a notice from Monroe Holdings. Immediate suspension of partnership with the entire regional management indefinitely. No names were exposed, no lawsuits filed. But internally, everyone understood. The one who had once been pushed out like a nobody had now stood up and rewritten the rules of how this world should operate. Cassie wasn't publicly punished. But when she returned to work after a voluntary leave, she found her name no longer on the staff list. No explanation was necessary, because the power she once held temporary and built on prejudice was never something meant to last. Zarya gave no press interviews. She didn't write a My Undercover Journey article to earn credit. She only appeared once at the launch of the restaurant chain's new internal training program. Respect first. You don't need to be somebody. On stage, there were no grand stage lights, no dramatic music. She walked up, simple, elegant, and said, "I'm not here as an heiress. I'm here as someone who was once denied the right to be respected, just because I didn't look like someone worthy of respect." Applause broke out. But she raised her hand. "I don't need applause. I need change." After the event, people noticed Julian sitting in the very last row. He wasn't wearing a suit. Still the same old shirt, hands in his pockets, head down. But the way he looked at Zaria was the gaze of someone who now understood exactly what is worth keeping and who is worth walking beside. A few weeks later, a new staff member joined the very same restaurant branch where it had all started. She was an immigrant girl, not fluent in English, a little clumsy when carrying water. A customer shook his head and asked for someone else. But the new manager, young, brown-skinned, wearing a small Respect First badge on her chest, simply smiled and said, "She's learning. We respect those who try, not just those who get it right on day one." The customer didn't reply, but neither did he complain again. Zaria and Julian didn't throw a lavish engagement party. They didn't move into a mansion. They rented a small apartment with a kitchen just big enough to bake coconut cookies together every Saturday night, and a round table for two just enough to share the truth with each other. They didn't need much, because they knew there was a time when even a single fair glance was a luxury. One late afternoon, Zaria sat alone in a small cafe at the end of the street, the place she and Julian would sometimes go when they wanted to step away from the world. She wore a crew-neck sweater, her hair tied neatly, an unfinished book in front of her, and a steaming cup of ginger tea by her side. A young waitress approached, a bit flustered after accidentally spilling some water on the table. She bowed her head, quickly reaching for a towel. "I'm so sorry. I just started yesterday. I'm still getting used to things." Zaria looked up and smiled gently. "It's all right. Everyone starts somewhere." The girl nodded, smiled with relief, then walked away. Zaria watched her for a moment, then returned to her unfinished page. No one in the cafe knew who she was. No one looked at her with suspicion, and no one tried to win her favor. They simply saw a quiet, kind woman, and that was enough. She didn't need to be recognized for being a Monroe. She didn't need anyone's approval based on the wealth behind her name. All she needed, just like the very first day she stepped into that cramped kitchen with a tray of water in hand, was to be seen as a person. And now, when the system she once silently tested had changed, when the one beside her chose her not for her name, she knew she didn't need to stand above anyone. She just needed not to be seen as beneath them. No background music. No grand closing statement. Just one final image. Zaria, sitting quietly in a cafe like any other ordinary woman, but in her eyes was the strength that once made an entire system back down, simply because she dared to stand tall, without carrying any title at all. Never judge someone by the apron they're wearing, because one day, you might be speaking to the person rewriting your payroll.